I'm Scott Soshnick.
And I'm Eben Novy-Williams, and this is the Gamers on the Boulevard sports business podcast, the Sporticast.
I can see Ralf Reichert ready. He's ready. He's got his coffee. You want to show it again there, Ralf? You got your evening coffee. You got your McDonald's
no
coffee.
advertisement. No advertisement.
Oh, it's okay.
No free
Not a
ads.
sponsor here either. But
No free ads.
yeah, but we'll give our taglines. It's not half bad. All right, McDonald's not half bad. We like to grade, Ralph. We like to grade Eben's openings. So, Gamers on the Boulevard. I thought he brought decent enthusiasm. I'm not sure if everybody knows exactly what he's referencing, but your thoughts on his opening, please.
Well, impressive, right? I think we have plenty of MCs who run the shows in the arenas, so definitely need some more talent there. So let's talk after the podcast.
I'm auditioning. That's
Look at you.
exactly
You're
right.
auditioning for an MC. I would love to see you be one of these in-arena entertainment people that just screams from start to finish, Eben. There is your calling. I think that's what I think of when I think of you.
Someday.
All right. Well, Ralph, you are the CEO of the Esports World Cup Foundation, which, of course, runs the Esports World Cup. And I don't think people understand the scope of the event. So rather than me tell them how long, how many teams, how much money, why don't we start there? You explain the scope of what is actually ongoing right now in Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely, sure. So, look, hopefully most of the audience knows esports tournaments, which are, specifically like game specific, right? There's a fantastic League of Legends Worlds. There's great Intel Extreme Masters Tournament in Counter-Strike. There's fantastic ones in Dota. So each game has its own ecosystem, like any other sport, if you think about it, right? American football, soccer, as you guys call it, baseball, tennis. They all have an ecosystem. They're all very different if you think about it. People forget that all the time. They think like sports is super logically structured. Spoiler, it's not. Everyone is its own small planet. And then there's actually only very, very few things that tie it together. The Olympics is one of them. There is some athletics, some things which have more than one of the sports together, but it's actually rare. And the Esports World Cup is the first of a kind to do that at scale in esports. What does it mean in numbers, right? When you go back to it, we have 21 different games, which is a crazy amount of number, right? So just think about it. Well, again, I said, usually they're on their own. It's one big tournament a weekend. We have 21 in a row. It spans over 8 weeks.
I want to be clear for those of my age that Pac-Man and Space Invaders are not among the 21 games listed. I would be very tough to beat in Space Invaders, just so you know.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's and actually our promise is it's the best games in the world, right? It's from all over the world. It's the biggest games in China, the biggest in the US, the biggest in Europe, the biggest in the world. It's a mix of console, PC, and mobile as well, right? So it's platform agnostic, which is important in this industry. But anyway, it's these 21 games who run, some of them parallel, but in those 8 weeks after each other. And the winner of the Esports World Cup, each game has its own game champion, right? Like in traditional sports. But the winner across the Esports World Cup is the club that earns most points across all of these competitions. Means it's a little bit like a ranking where you have medals, and the one club that wins most medals / points and at least one competition, that's a prerequisite, is the best club in the world. And again, at that scale, no one ever even remotely tried to do that.
Ralph,
That means,
sorry. It sounds more to me like the Olympics than the World Cup, right? Like the Olympics is multiple sports, multiple disciplines, and then competing for some kind of bigger, higher thing. World Cup, I think of almost as a single discipline. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's just where my brain goes.
And historically it is, and esports is always, taking some historics and trying to put it in the future. So you're right? There's nothing I would argue against that. With one thing is that in traditional sports, really the origin of it was local pride in countries. If you think about it, right? Yeah. That's how this all started. While in esports, borders never had a big meaning because the digital server is an internet connection away, not a physical street. What do I mean by that is that 25 years ago when this all started, I would play myself and I would play against people from all over Europe or all over the US, depending on where I am. And don't really identify in the first place with the country I'm from. right? Well, all other sports are, you need to meet physically at one point in time. So it's logic that they're local first, right? That they are really about that. Esports never was. That means the whole heritage, the whole industry is built on these clubs, which, are more like tribes if you think about it, but digital tribes, not physical ones. So you don't need to be in one place in time.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, though. Let's just say American soccer, if you would. There is a Brazilian way of playing, Jogo Bonito. There are different styles based on that tribalism, based on those borders. Will this develop in the gamer culture? Will you play Counter-Strike a certain way if you're German versus if you're Italian or if you're Korean?
The answer is probably yes, but no. And that I get is confusing. And what do I mean by that? It always starts somewhere, but because you mix so early, right? In football, specifically on any other sports, you inevitably play your youth games with people who are close to you. It just doesn't work any other way, right? It's not a professional sport at that point. So you will have these local styles. In esports, you don't. The minute you start, you play with people from all over the world. That means you mix immediately. That means there's something regional there, that's true, but very, very rarely and very, very seldom, it's really something that is country-based. There are some islands, Korea as an example, right, which is a little bit isolated. So there's something like this happens, but in most of the other places, it's actually cross-border.
So let's talk about how the World Cup gets to, I don't think we've mentioned Saudi Arabia yet, underway already, 8-week event, which is very long, and I do have questions about that also. But as you said, esports for the last decade has been siloed essentially within games themselves. This is a very big and I imagine very expensive attempt to kind of tear down those silos to a degree. But walk us through how esports got and the World Cup got to where we are right now, underway, taking place in Riyadh.
Sure. And I think important to know is that esports up until today has been almost exclusively funded by private companies. Well, it's very reliant on actually the publisher themselves, who are almost like the global federation of it, and who own every pitch in the world of that specific sport. Number two, sponsorship has been the core drivers. Media rights, partly, merchandise. So traditional sports model, but much earlier in the life cycle and therefore much less developed. What everyone forgets is that traditional sports is heavily government funded, heavily. And that means specifically in the grassroots world, right? There wouldn't be college places without public schools who pay for it, right? There wouldn't be basketball courts all over without government support. And that's the way all over the world. So the grassroots is super, super big, public funded. And the same is actually for the top sports. If you think about it, we spoke briefly about the Olympics, right? They are a big financial endeavor for the host country. So the host country fees, how we call it, is a key financing methodology for that specific sport. And what's different about the Esports World Cup than any other of the existing esports tournaments in the whole landscape is that it's heavily funded by those country hosting fees. Means the government of Saudi Arabia, is heavily subsidizing the Esports World Cup to happen. And that is a good thing, and that's nothing crazy. It's very normal in traditional sports. It just hasn't happened at that scale in esports, and therefore it's obviously a fresh and new story, to be honest.
One of the things that I think is interesting and slightly different, we talk about sovereign wealth and global investment in traditional sports on this show all the time. One of the things that I think is different about esports, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a lot of other investment happening in other sports, right? The golf, there's the PGA Tour, there's the European Tour. There's a lot of establishment and investment continually going into golf. Same with tennis and wrestling and MMA, a lot of other sports that Saudi Arabia is getting involved in. My knowledge and reporting in the esports world, at least in the past few years, is that there's money coming out of esports in other places, right? And I do wonder if, in some ways, if Saudi Arabia was not putting money into this, would anyone else do it? Would this be a product that exists somewhere else in the world? Would there be backing for it if not for the Saudi 2030 Vision Fund and all that?
So I think there's two ways to look at this. I mean, number one, are people putting money into esports, governments and government entities? Yes, but it's small. It's very tiny. It's very early. It's still a very new sport. And if you look at the demographics, most leaders in the world, most political leaders, right? And that's true for everyone, would invest in the sport they know, they've been growing up with. It's just how the world works. And most of those leaders are significantly older than I am. Means they haven't grown up with video games. Means that it's not their natural instinct to do this. Saudi Arabia is different, right? The leadership is incredibly young. The crown prince is below 40. So he has grown up as a gamer. So he understands. And therefore, Saudi Arabia is incredibly early compared to the rest of the world in investing into that sport. Are they the only one? Absolutely not. But are they the first one who do it at scale? Absolutely yes.
We are chatting with Ralf Reichert, CEO of the Esports World Cup. And Ralf, it's interesting you mentioned the sort of political leaders and age. We don't have those discussions in the United States. There's nothing going on in terms of political leaders and age here, so we don't know. We really don't know what you're referring to there. But I consider this, by the way, and this could be a little different with the traditional sports, although there is heavy investment. When we talk about public-private partnerships, the private happens to be me. I have a 15-year-old. He has an Xbox, and we're just telling Eben, I can spend $500 on a headset. I can spend 19. I chose 19. Tough. But there's significant investment in the private sector, meaning me, to give my kid the basis of what he needs to then be taken over by you so you can reach into my wallet via that game console. So I think that it starts at home. And then it can expand from there. I mean, that's a little bit of a different model from traditional athletics where, I sign him up for a club team or something like that, but I'm bringing it into the home and I'm getting him addicted right in his own bedroom.
Well, I would argue a bit with that, right? So let's jump on it. I mean, first, we're in the same boat, right? My 13-year-old son and my 10-year-old daughter have the same pattern as yours. So you're not alone in this.
Good.
Let me put it like this.
We should have a support group. This is good.
Yes, parent support forum. Anyway, but if you look at actually any other sport, you need to do investment to do it as well. There's almost none where you just can go out and you don't need shoes, shirts, whatever, constant training, trying to get better. So almost any other sport has some barrier to entry, and some are high, right? I mean, motorsport is most expensive of it all to look at it, or skiing or whatever, right? So it's not the first time that a sport costs you money to enter. And historically, and that's why it has grown so dramatically in the last years, that investment was high. Right, 15, 20 years ago, computer to buy and so on. So actually first consoles lowered that investment, lowered the barrier to entry and became a mainstream device. And nowadays, every kid in the world has a mobile phone in his pocket, means it has a super potent game console in his pocket. So that's why it's so ubiquitous. That's why it's so everywhere. And that's why I'm so bullish about it, because you have one huge advantage. To do traditional sports, for us to play basketball together, we need to meet with 10 people at one place, at one pitch, which someone needs to be paid for.
Oh, human interaction, terrible.
It's a logistical nightmare. Let's think about it. An American football match, even worse, right? I mean, it's theoretically impossible.
This is another support group topic. Have you ever seen your 13-year-old try and arrange a meeting between, let's say, more than 2 or 3 of his friends? I listen to my son. It takes them 3 hours to decide what to do, where to do it, when to do it, and by then the opportunity has been missed and they have to start the cycle.
In Fortnite, it takes less time. It takes way less time
they just need to pick into which area are they landing in. Even I know that. Yeah,
exactly. And you don't need to be at the same space at the same time, right? So that removes so much friction in playing together. That removes so much friction in competing that we can jump right after this podcast together. And even though I'm in Saudi and you're in the US, right, we can do it together. It's no problem whatsoever. And that's the crazy thing about it. That's this low barrier to entry, and that's part of why it's so popular.
So let's go back to the World Cup for a second. You're about a week in, seven more weeks to go. Give us an update on crowds, on audience that is watching? I'm curious what has worked, what has been better, what has been worse than what you thought so far.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we're in year one, right? So expectation needs to be set. We're not the biggest sport event in the world yet. It's our ambition to get there, to be clear, but we're not in year one, right? We have a few years, maybe a few decades to get there. So we have 3 tournaments running at the same time in week 1, and that's most of the time. And mathematically, then that's up, right? 8 times 3 is 24. So it's not completely correct, but roughly we have two to three tournaments a week. And 2 of them concluded of the 3 this week, which is League of Legends, which is the largest esports in the world.
That's the biggest one.
And Call of Duty Warzone, which is a battle royale, means it's 64 players playing against each other.
That's the one for my son right there. He loves COD.
I thought so. Let's talk about viewership. 2 of the 3 games have hit 1 million concurrent viewers in the West only. China always has additional numbers, which are a little bit segregated, which in esports, if you hit 1 million viewers, you're top of the top. That's AAA, that's up there, then you're super relevant across the world. We don't have unique numbers yet, right? Because we don't have the numbers of all the linear takers. We have 59 media partners, to be clear around this. But I'm trying to find the right way to say it. But it already is in week 1, probably the 3rd or 4th largest esports events in the world, right? So, and that will go up over the weeks. It will cumulate together. So I think in terms of viewership, we're incredibly happy. And we will shatter some very big records. I can promise that already without going out of my comfort zone. I think if you look at attendance, you need to think a little bit about this, as we spoke about, as something where you have the arenas and the people watching and a festival around it, like a trade fair. Right, and that trade fair is attended by tens of thousands of people, some 20 to 40,000 people a day. That's how you can look at. The arenas itself are still small, so we have a total capacity, I think, of 3,000 viewers, which are easily sold out on the weekends. But in the group stage, we're still building a sport. It's still early, so there are still tickets to get. And it's overall early days, and I've seen this before. It needs 2-3 years to build that fan culture. We need to bring people to these arenas to see that's actually a sport, right? It's not as established yet. And then I'm sure, or we know that next year we will want to have the finals in arenas and continue to grow the group stages. So there we're right within expectation, but it's going to take time, to be honest.
And are the people who are most people who are going, are they living in Saudi Arabia already? Are they tourists coming in for this specific tournament as part of the 8 weeks? Are people coming for the full 8 weeks? I'm curious what you're seeing kind of demographically. Because I know that tourism is important to Saudi Arabia. For 100%. A lot of the things it's investing in is bringing people to the country that would otherwise not have gone.
Yeah, and there's another angle to this, right? There's plenty of myth about the kingdom, and bringing people in and seeing it first place is kind of the only way you can deal with it. So it's even not only tourism, it's as well to see that this is real and a good place to come. Anyway, going back to your question. We have tourists coming. We see this very game specific, interestingly, right? So Honor of Kings is a week 5 tournament where we already know a few hundred Chinese are traveling because the tickets were bought from China, right? So it's very game specific. Right now, MLBB is the game that we had. It's super big in Southeast Asia, and we have plenty of ticket buyers from there. But this is year 1, so it's not tens of thousands of people. It's a few thousand people that will come for this directly. In 6-7 years, we have a clear goal to get 1 million tourists around this to the kingdom, right? And then it's at scale and big. This year, it's really year 0. And we're trying to get it right and make sure that the amount that comes, we can actually cope with and have a good experience.
And I am curious. There is some controversy around Saudi Arabia and its human rights record, and we have seen in other sports that when Saudi money comes in, there are often fans and sponsors who feel some sort of way. I am curious what you have seen from the gaming community and also on the corporate side from both the sponsors and also from the publishers. And the publishers are obviously critical to making this event go. How much pushback that you have heard or concerns you've heard from those classes about Saudi Arabia's involvement in the event?
Yeah, first and foremost, because the gaming community, and that's something I want to quickly talk about maybe as well. It's 3.4 billion people, right? So it's a subset of human population. It's not like this niche thing. It's like small and these some guys. So the sentiment is incredibly similar to anywhere else, I would argue. And how do we deal with this sentiment? And it's not based on craziness or something like this. A lot of this stuff is true in the past, right? So, but information actually, even in our age, travels slow. The kingdom is this country in change. So much has changed in the last 6-7 years. People can't believe. And even when I came here first time, which was 2020, right? I had my concept as well, my framing. And it turned out to be wrong, to be very clear, right? But even in those 3.5 years since 2020, this has changed so much as well, right? I mean, we've seen 90 international sports events happening without anything, any impact, any negative case of what people would think could happen. Right? We've seen so much progress. Women are all over my team working here. It's the most normal thing. But it's our job to bring people here to see it themselves, because me preaching it now, right? People will say, of course, he's the Esports World Cup CEO. Why would he say anything else? So we really need to have the community, the players, the fans come here, experience themselves, and then bring home their experience. And yes, it's a country in change. It doesn't have the same cultural norms than the US, nor Europe, to be very clear. And by the way, the ones in Europe and the US are very different on many topics as well, right? So there will be a difference, but it's clearly quickly progressing and moving forward. And we feel confident that, people will have a great time here.
Yeah, John Skipper, the former president of ESPN, once told me that his job is to be able to figure out how to monetize eyeballs. Just get me the eyeballs, and then it's incumbent upon him to figure out how to get money out of it. It seems like that's where we are here with esports. If you're aggregating those eyeballs, what is that plan 1, 3, 5 years to monetize the people watching? It is a different age group, different demo. Excuse me. What's the plan to monetize?
Yeah. So I think no one has the answer, to be very clear, to start with, right? This is uncharted territory, and this is the billion-dollar question, or the multi-billion-dollar question, to be honest.
I just want to let you know, if you say in-game purchases, my head is going to explode, just so you know.
And it's going to come. I'm going to phrase it differently, but I'm going to say the same. Okay. If you look at traditional sports, how is it really monetized? It's monetized by pay-per-view. However you look at it, it's always pay-per-view. The user pays for watching the content, right? And yes, there's advertisement model, but these are still actually indirect ways to monetize the user. In esports, I don't think we will have a pay-per-view model ever, or, as long as I can see the future. Why? Because even the core business model of the esports industry is free to play, right? So automatically access to the game and access to the content, I feel, will always be free. I don't see this changing whatsoever. So the question is, Scott, how do you monetize, a huge audience which has free access? I mean, number one, it still monetizes through scale, right? We make money through our broadcasts by the sheer scale of it. Small money compared to pay-per-view, let's be honest, but it's money. And if it continues to grow and continues to gain in relevance, that money will grow accordingly. So that can be a sizable amount. But in the end of the day, it's about the engagement of the fans and fantasy football, merchandise, in-game app purchases, buying the cup of the Esports World Cup digitally, being engaged around the tournament will ultimately be the driver, and no one has figured this out, and it's clearly that it needs to involve a strong push by the game publishers. But if you want to be the biggest sport in the world, then I think it's a smart way to open up for it.
How are you marrying social as part of this?
I mean, social was a game changer for esports overall, right? I mean, up until 2008, 9, 10, esports kind of missed its natural way to be reported about. Social is our number one channel how we engage with our fans, but it's actually only a reach monetization through sponsorships, so an indirect one. There is no direct one at this point. A little bit different in China, actually. So it's market specific within have gifting, and there's already something to be seen. But it's secondary. It's clearly the live content that's number one.
So I think when most people hear World Cup, I think a lot of them think soccer. So I'm looking now at FIFA's just revenue breakdown percentage wise. In the 4-year cycle that included the last Men's World Cup, $7.5 billion of revenue. 3.4 billion of that was TV rights. So let's say that's roughly 40% TV rights. Another 2.5 is marketing and licensing, and then less than $1 billion on the hospitality, ticket sales, all that. Roughly, what's the healthy breakdown, or where are you now? Again, as you're talking, I assume media rights is not going to be 40 to 50% of your revenue. It sounds like the marketing and the licensing is the bigger piece, and maybe hospitality in there too. But give us a healthy breakdown of what you expect.
Sure, no worries. I mean, and maybe to add to what you just said, right? If you look at leagues, they even have a higher amount of media rights, right? They go up to 80%. So I think what we've seen in the past and what my expectation is that media is somewhere between 10 and 30%, depending on how scaled we get this and how important with it, which is actually a little bit in line with the old Formula One model. They had a similar one. They were for the longest time free to air mostly rather than pay-per-view. So that's a little bit the benchmark. For the Esports World Cup, country hosting fees will always be a part. I'm 100% convinced. And to go back to the start, we're a non-profit, right? So for me, it's not about making money. It's just finding a balanced budget. Sponsorship will be the majority. As you said, I think it's 40% with FIFA. For us, it will be 50-ish, I think, 50, 60. Merch, licensing, and in-game purchases, I think, are actually the other, 30-ish plus percent. So it's a mix, and we don't know, and it will change over time. But I'm clearly thinking sponsorship first, community monetization, fan monetization second, media right third, and then obviously hospitality, ticketing, and so on and so forth.
So you mentioned hosting fees. Is the vision here to do this in other countries moving forward, or is the vision to do this in Saudi Arabia every year? What's the thinking there?
The honest answer is there's no long-term, like, this is it thing. For the foreseeable future, it will happen in the kingdom, right? Because as we elaborated earlier, they're ahead of the curve. They're investing in it, and they're incredibly bullish around it. And it's an important part of Vision 2030 and so on and so forth. So it's part of a larger strategy. But that does not mean to rule out anything in other countries. Actually, if you think about it, to make this global, we need to have competitions and parts of this all over the world. It needs to involve the world. So there's definitely going to be some sort of expansion beyond just Saudi for offline parts of this tournament.
One last thing on my end. We touched on it at the beginning. This is an 8-week event. That seems crazy long to me. I'm sure it's going to feel like a year of your life just to get through it. And I understand there's 24 sports involved here, but the Olympics is in 8 weeks, right? The World Cup soccer is in 8 weeks. I can't think of a sporting event in any capacity that is 8 weeks long. What is the thinking behind that? Is that just necessary to have all the weekends? I'm curious how you end up with an event that is like 1/6 of the year or whatever it is.
Look, I think it's a little bit based on the idea that we want to give every game, every tournament the space it deserves. Because we have the unique opportunity to bring in all of gaming, right? Usually that tournament that we had at the beginning addresses one community, 100 million, 200 million, 50 million, 300 million players. This has a chance to address all of them, the whole 3.4 billion one. And because it's such a diverse community and it's so many different games, we just said, let's do it right, let's do it broad, and let's give each tournament the space and tell the story of the connecting club champion so well. And and actually not follow the traditional model, which means it's no longer than 4 weeks. We'll see, right? It's I'm not saying it's always going to be 8 weeks. That's a given. But so far, we feel confident that we're doing the right thing because we, again, want to honor these communities. We want to make these players stars, and that needs the right time in it.
Eben, kudos to your mathematics on the 1/6 of a year as quickly as you did that.
When I said it, I was a little worried that I did the math wrong.
Yeah, kudos on your mathematics. It's actually a devilishly ingenious plan to let Portugal and Ronaldo lose, free him up to then go back to the kingdom and make sort of celebrity appearances.
There you go.
And drum up support and media frenzy for the whole thing. Is Ronaldo playing a part? I mean, it's the most famous athlete that I can think of right now that I associate with Saudi. Are you getting Ronaldo to help you out here?
I can't confirm nor deny, but he was on our opening conference last October, so we'll definitely want him to be involved. I mean, he is the biggest sports icon in the world at this point in time, right? In terms of social media numbers, you can argue personally, but the numbers back it up. So we'd love him to be involved, and we'll surprise you.
Well, for what it's worth, Ralf, I'll have you know that it takes a little prodding to get my son to go to a traditional sport right now. Every now and then he says, let's go to a hockey game, let's go to a baseball game. But I will tell you, when they held the Fortnite Championship at the National Tennis Center in Queens, he was like, can we go? That was a proactive request. By the way, I didn't go. We had something else to do. But the fact is, he didn't get his wish. But the fact remains, he made the request. It's eye-opening. I call him my focus group of one because what he and his pals talk about and do, I know that goes to scale. And, I mean, they're yelling at each other every darn night so with the headsets on. So I know this is not a fancy that has just passed because they continue to do it.
Let me do a projection of the future. I think Saudi Arabia will start to be a holiday destination in your son's plan.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to think right now what would what's good for him? Like where does he want to go now? I ask him, what do you want to do for vacation? Nothing. Okay, great. I can't wait for him to say, Dad. No, wait. I stand corrected. I did say if you could go anywhere in the world right now, where would you like to go? And I think this may have a little bit of gamer culture. He said Tokyo.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Shibuya.
Yeah. Yep. So great. He'll say Tokyo and Riyadh. Wonderful. Nice, easy trips over spring break. Good to know.
By the way, if you make it this summer, there's actually an ad for the Esports World Cup over Shibuya on the out of home. So you'll recognize it.
Important market for you.
It's Ralf Reichert's big face on the ad on the digital billboards. I love it.
No, hopefully not.
All right, close it out, Eben.
All righty. Well, thank you very much to Ralf Reichert. He is the CEO.
By the way, Ralf, it's okay to talk over Eben. I like
World
to see
Cup
if he can
Foundation.
actually close it
find
while
Ralf
we speak to each
at
other.
Ralf
I mean,
Reichert.
it's fine.
You can find Scott on Twitter at Soshnick. You can find me on Twitter at Novy.
How about that 1/6 of a year?
Williams.
That was really good.
The show is produced by
That was
Aaron.
really good.
Thank you very
I'm still
much,
counting.
Aaron.
I'm still counting.
I'm like
Media
8
editor,
times
Cora
6.
Veltman.
I wasn't sure that.
No,
He can't
you
do
can
time
follow the
zones, but
show
he's
at
very good at
Sporticast,
math.
which is the hub.
And I
of
never
the
thought about it
Sportico
that way, to be
media
honest.